The abandoned house order. It was a slow night, and I was grateful for any order that popped up. The address was on the outskirts of town, where houses were spread far apart. When I arrived, the place looked abandoned, boarded-up windows, overgrown yard, and not a single light inside. I double-checked the app, and it confirmed this was the right place. I called the customer. A weak, whispery voice answered, "Leave it at the door. I'll get it soon." I hesitated but placed the bag down and took a quick photo for proof. As I turned to leave, I heard the soft creak of a door opening. I spun around. The door was slightly ajar, darkness spilling from inside. No one stepped out. No one grabbed the food. Just silence. Then I noticed something in the window. A face, pale and hollow-eyed, peering at me from inside the abandoned house. I sprinted back to my car. When I checked the app again, the order was marked "Cancelled." No record of it existed. The late-night regular. Every Friday night, I delivered a large pepperoni pizza to the same address. It was an old man, always standing in the doorway, before I even got out of my car. He never spoke much, just nodded and handed me a tip. One night, I arrived to find the house dark. No porch light, no sign of him waiting. I knocked, but no one answered. As I turned to leave, a neighbor called out, "Who are you looking for?" "The man who lives here," I said. The neighbor looked confused. "No one's lived there for years. The last guy, he died a decade ago." I showed them my delivery history, but the app only showed one order from months ago, no record of the weekly deliveries. When I looked back at the house, the door was open just a crack, and inside I swore I saw a shadow move. The drive-through phantom. I was working the late shift at a 24-hour fast food joint, handling both the register and the drive-through. Around 2 a.m., a car rolled up to the speaker. I greeted them, but all I heard was static, followed by a faint voice. "One burger, please." Something about the way they said it sent a chill down my spine. The security camera showed a car, but the driver's seat was empty. Still, I prepared the order and went to the window. No one was there. The car had vanished. I checked the cameras again, rewinding the footage. The car had never pulled away. It had never even been there at all. But the order ticket still sat on my screen, waiting to be completed. The passenger in the back seat. I was pulling into a customer's driveway for a delivery when I glanced in my rearview mirror. A woman was sitting in my back seat. I slammed on the brakes and whipped around, but the seat was empty. Heart pounding, I turned back to the mirror. She was still there, pale skin, dark eyes, staring straight at me. I bolted from the car, leaving the food on the hood. When I looked back, she was gone. But the next morning, I found a single handprint on the fogged-up inside of my back window, one that didn't match mine. The house that watched me. I had a delivery to a house I'd never seen before, despite working the area for years. It stood at the end of a dead-end street, looming and untouched by time. The windows were dark, but as I approached, I felt unseen eyes watching me. I knocked once. No answer. As I set the bag down, my phone buzzed with a message from the app. "Do not leave. Bring inside." Confused, I knocked again. The door creaked open on its own. A wave of stale air hit me, thick with decay. My gut told me to leave, but I stepped inside. The floorboards groaned under my weight. Then I saw them, dozens of pictures covering the walls. All of them were of me, taken from angles I didn't recognize. The time stamps. Each photo was taken moments before I knocked on the door. The man in the basement. A pizza delivery to an upscale home should have been an easy drop-off. The man who answered looked disheveled, his eyes darting around nervously. He shoved a wad of cash into my hands and muttered, "I didn't order this." Before I could respond, another voice called out from inside, "Please don't listen to him, I'm down here." The man's face went white. He slammed the door shut. I stood there frozen, heart pounding. Then I heard it, scratching, weak thuds against the door, as if someone was trapped just behind it. I ran back to my car and called the cops. When they arrived, they forced the door open. The house was empty, except for a locked basement door. They broke it down and found a man, gaunt, trembling, and barely alive. He had been missing for weeks. The house that spoke my name. I had a delivery for an address I didn't recognize. The house was deep in the woods, an old Victorian-style home with a single flickering lantern on the porch. As I approached, my phone buzzed. A new message from the customer. "Come inside. The door is open." I didn't want to, but something about the air felt heavy, suffocating. I knocked, but the door creaked open on its own. The interior was dark except for a dim hallway leading deeper inside. Then, in the silence, I heard it. Whispers. Faint at first, then louder. They were saying my name. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind me. The whispers turned to laughter, deep, guttural, mocking. I fumbled for my phone to call for help, but my screen had changed. Instead of my home screen, a message appeared. "You're already home." Something exhaled right behind me. I don't remember how I got out. I just remember waking up in my car, the food still in my hands. My delivery app? The order was gone. No record of it. But my phone had a new message. "See you soon." The empty apartment. It was a standard apartment delivery, 3rd floor, end of the hall. When I knocked, a voice inside called, "Just leave it on the table." Confused, I knocked again. "You want me to come in?" No answer. But the door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit apartment. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I stepped inside and placed the food on the kitchen table. That's when I noticed it. The apartment was completely empty. No furniture, no decorations, just bare walls and dust. The air was ice cold. I turned to leave, but then I heard it again. "Thank you." It came from right beside me. I ran. When I got downstairs, I asked the front desk about the apartment. The receptionist frowned. "That unit's been vacant for years." I looked at my app. The order was gone. No address. No payment. Nothing. The hands in the window. A storm was rolling in as I pulled up to an old house in the countryside. The power was out, the house barely visible except for the occasional flash of lightning. As I walked up the path, I noticed movement in an upstairs window, small hands pressed against the glass. A child. I knocked, but no one answered. Another flash of lightning, and I saw the child again. But now he was standing at the bottom of the stairs inside, staring at the door. I knocked again. The door creaked open slightly. "Hello?" I called. No response, just silence. Then I heard it, whispers, quiet giggles, circling me. My breath came out in clouds. The air was freezing. I turned to leave, but something grabbed my wrist, ice-cold, tiny fingers. I spun around. Nothing was there, but the door. It was now wide open, and at the top of the stairs the child was there again. His eyes were black voids, his mouth slowly stretched into a grin. I didn't stay to see what happened next. The demon's tip. It was my last delivery of the night. A simple drop-off at a house that barely looked lived in. The man who answered was tall, gaunt, with deep sunken eyes. He grinned as he took the food and handed me a tip. An old, crumpled bill. The moment it touched my hand, my skin burned. I dropped it, and as it hit the ground, I saw it was blackened, covered in strange symbols. "Thanks," the man said, stepping back inside. "He's been waiting for you." The door slammed shut. I sprinted back to my car, my hand still stinging. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. My passenger seat was no longer empty. A shadowed figure sat there, grinning at me. And then the engine stalled. The thing that crawled toward me. I got an order from an address that didn't seem real, just Black Hollow Road, No house number. My GPS struggled, but eventually I found myself in front of an old abandoned church. I hesitated, but the app pinged. Deliver to front steps. I stepped out, the wind howling around me. The door of the church was slightly ajar, revealing nothing but darkness inside. Then, from the shadows, something moved. It didn't walk, it crawled. A figure, twisted and broken, dragging itself toward me on all fours, its limbs bending the wrong way. Its head twitched unnaturally as it grinned, revealing jagged, uneven teeth. "You're late," it rasped. I dropped the food and ran. When I got back to my car, my phone vibrated. A new review had been left on my delivery app. "Great service. Would order again." But there was no name, no profile, just an address. Mine. The address that doesn't exist. I got an order for a house in a neighborhood I knew well, but when I arrived at the pinned location, there was no house, just an empty lot with overgrown grass. Confused, I checked the app. The order was still active. Then my phone buzzed. "I see you." "Just leave it by the door." I hesitated. There was no door, no house, no sign of life. Just then I heard a creak, like a door swinging open. When I turned back, there was a rotting wooden doorframe standing in the middle of the lot, freestanding with nothing attached to it. A shadow stood behind it, shifting in the darkness beyond the frame. A hand, bony and clawed, reached out toward me. I dropped the food and ran. The next day, I checked the app again. The order was gone, as if it had never been placed. But later that night, a half-eaten meal was sitting on my front porch, along with a note that read, "Thanks for the delivery. See you soon." The Demon in Apartment 6. B. I got a delivery request to an old apartment complex. The order was for 6B. I knocked on the door, and a woman answered, thin, pale, with hollow eyes. "You should leave," she whispered. "He's already watching you." Before I could respond, she slammed the door. My phone buzzed. "Ignore her. Bring it inside." The order was still active, and it now had new instructions. "Do not leave it outside." Against my better judgment, I knocked again. This time, the door creaked open on its own. The apartment was completely dark, the air thick with the smell of rot. As I stepped inside, a deep, guttural growl filled the room. A shadow moved in the corner. Not a person, something too tall, too thin, its limbs too long. Its head twisted unnaturally as two burning red eyes locked onto me. I bolted. When I reached my car, I glanced back. The apartment was gone. There was no 6B, just a solid brick wall. The possessed passenger I was doing rideshare along with deliveries, picking up a woman late at night. She was silent, her face obscured by a hood, but she gave me an address. "The entire ride," she whispered in a language I didn't recognize. Halfway there, she let out a low, guttural chuckle and said in a voice that wasn't hers, "This is not your car anymore." The doors locked on their own. My steering wheel jerked violently as if something else was trying to take control. My radio turned to static, then whispered in the same eerie voice. I slammed the brakes. When I turned around, the back seat was empty. The next morning, I checked my dash cam footage. The woman never got out of the car. But in the last few frames, as I was panicking, there was a dark shape sitting in the back seat, grinning at the camera. The Hellhound of Hollow Street. A late-night order took me to an old neighborhood with no streetlights. As I drove up, I saw a huge black dog sitting in the middle of the road. Its eyes glowed red, and its teeth were too long, too sharp. I honked. It didn't move. I drove around it and continued to the house. The moment I stepped onto the porch, I heard claws scratching against the pavement. When I turned around, the dog was gone. But the deep growling was right behind me. I spun back to the door, but it had vanished. The house was gone, just an open field now. And then I heard a voice, deep and layered with something inhuman. "You shouldn't have come here." I woke up in my car, parked miles away. My phone still had the completed order in my history, but when I checked the address on the map, the street didn't exist, the order from the other side. It was a normal night until I got an order from a name I recognized, a guy who used to order from my restaurant all the time. The problem? He had died 2 months ago. I figured it was just someone else using his account, but when I arrived, it was his old house, now abandoned. A note on the app said, "Knock 3 times. I will answer." I knocked once. Nothing. Twice. The wind picked up. The third knock. The door swung open by itself. Inside, everything was covered in dust, untouched for years. but sitting on the table was a fresh, steaming plate of food. My delivery, already opened. My phone buzzed one last time. Thanks for stopping by, don't forget. Next time I'll come to you. 1. The mysterious package. It was a dark, stormy night when Ryan got the call. The dispatcher told him about a late-night delivery that needed to be made urgently, a package for a cabin out in the woods. He didn't ask too many questions. He was used to strange deliveries, especially on nights like this. The cabin was tucked away deep in the forest, nearly hidden by the thick trees. As Ryan pulled up, he could barely make out the shape of the structure in the dim light of his headlights. It was a small, dilapidated place, its windows dark, but a faint light flickered from behind one of them. He took a deep breath, grabbed the package, and made his way up the creaky porch. The door creaked open slowly when he knocked. A woman stood in the doorway, pale, gaunt, with dark circles under her eyes. She looked like she hadn't seen sunlight in years. She didn't smile or say anything, just stared at him with a blank expression. "Your package," Ryan said, holding it out. She reached out and took it without a word, then stepped back into the shadows of the house. Ryan hesitated for a moment, the air feeling unnaturally cold. Something felt wrong. Before he could turn to leave, the woman spoke, her voice low and raspy. "Leave before it comes." Ryan didn't need to be told twice. He turned and sprinted back to his truck, the hairs on his neck standing on end. He barely made it to his vehicle when he saw something out of the corner of his eye. At the window of the cabin, the woman stood. But she wasn't alone. A tall, shadowy figure loomed behind her, its eyes glowing faintly red in the darkness. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at Ryan as he climbed into the truck and sped off. As he drove away, he could hear something faint, like whispers, coming from the forest. And they weren't the sound of the wind. The next morning, Ryan checked the delivery route again, looking for the cabin, but it was gone. The street, the road, the cabin, nothing was there. It was as if it had never existed. 2. The wrong address. It was nearly midnight when Tom got his last delivery for the night. A large package, no destination listed on the form, other than a single street address. He shrugged, thinking it was just one of those weird deliveries. But when he arrived, something felt off. The house at the address was ancient, decayed wood, cracked windows, and vines creeping up the walls. It was the kind of place that seemed abandoned, yet there was a faint light flickering from within. He rang the doorbell, but there was no answer. Instead, the door slowly creaked open. "Hello?" Tom called out. "Delivery for Mr. Blackwell?" A voice from the shadows replied, "Come in. We've been waiting for you." Tom hesitated, but then stepped inside. The air inside the house was thick, cold, and smelled faintly of something rotting. He could barely see in the dim light, but there were old portraits hanging on the walls, their eyes seeming to follow his every move. "Mr. Blackwell?" Tom asked again, feeling a growing sense of unease. "Right here," came the answer, and a figure emerged from the dark corner of the room. The man was tall, his skin unnaturally pale, and his eyes were hollow, as if something dark resided within. He reached out for the package with a thin, bony hand. Tom handed it over, but as he did, the man's fingers brushed against his own. A chill shot up his spine, and he felt a strange pressure in his chest. The man smiled, revealing rows of sharp teeth. His voice was almost a whisper. "Thank you for bringing what I need." Suddenly, the room grew colder. Tom turned to leave, but found the door was gone, replaced by a solid wall. Panic set in as he backed away, eyes darting around the room. The paintings, no longer still, began to move. The figures in them twisted, contorting, and their eyes began to glow. Then a voice, deep, guttural, ancient, boomed from the walls. "You shouldn't have come, boy." Tom slammed his fist against the wall, but it was no use. The house, it seemed, had swallowed him whole. The last thing he saw was Blackwell's face, twisted in a demonic grin before everything went black.